The executioners have done their work. The scene has been depicted by countless artists, but this painting became the marvel of its age. We see 9 people taking down the body. The figures are life-sized. Their impact is overwhelming.
It's a big work, but the figures in it as well are monumental. But they are so incredibly powerful, and every part of them is so carefully thought about. The colour, the textures, the pattern.
I think that this painting is one of the greatest works of art I've ever seen. Technically, as well as emotionally, as well as compositionally, everything comes together.
Grief and anguish flood out of the picture.
Crying works that way. It wails up in great pitches of emotion and then it subsides. It has that sense of welling up and subsiding. The painting has those qualities.
This may be the most compassionate account of suffering ever painted, yet it was commissioned by a formidable troop of military men. And the painting has survived its own violent history, rescued from shipwreck and civil war.
When you see these almost life-size figures, you're standing in front of them, they do seem to start moving into your own world.
This painting is so revolutionary, it still makes an impact in the video age. When the high-tech cameras of Google Earth entered a museum for the first time, this was one of the paintings they focused their lenses on.
It's astounding. Sorts of detail that still, in an age of digital reproduction for us, are astounding as accomplishments of a painter's brush.
It's one of the most influential works of art ever, yet it is still giving up its secrets. Jan van Eyck, van der Weyden's great contemporary, displayed equally brilliant technique in his painting, but he seemed to show little interest in exploring human emotions. When van Eyck portrayed the Virgin Mary hearing the news that she had been chosen by God to give birth to Jesus, he painted a static, deadpan face. She might have been thinking about her domestic chores. By contrast, van der Weyden was a virtuoso at painting how people feel. He framed his painting between 2 emotional women, the Madonna and Mary Magdalene the whore. Both are weeping copiously.
Tears are an extraordinary feature of this painting, and van der Weyden had a very neat little trick for painting tears. You just mix up 2 colours, a shadow tone and a highlight, almost pure white, and you paint a little shadow on the darker side of the tear just to define the shape of the teardrop and the run of water, and you put 2 highlights, a strong one on the lit side and a soft curved one on the inner side of the teardrop against the shadow, and you've got a perfect globule of water in possibly half a minute.
Van der Weyden did not just excel at painting tears. By making the Virgin Mary look even paler than the body of her dead son, he has conveyed all the desolation of bereavement.
It's hard for us to imagine how awful it must be to be confronted by the body of your dead child, particularly in circumstances like this. So it's understandable that she has collapsed.
The Virgin Mary has come a long way from not even being mentioned in the Gospel's account of the descent from the cross. In this painting, van der Weyden has made Mary almost as important as Christ himself. At the time the picture was painted, Mary was becoming the key figure for ordinary people to pray to. Theologians believed, no one can enter heaven unless by Mary, as though through a door.
The position of Mary in the painting is clearly very central. She echoes the shape and the form and the experience of Christ, who has offered himself through his death to the Father, opening for us a way to heaven. And Mary, in that close identification with Christ, also expresses another of her titles, which is the Gate of Heaven.
Van der Weyden made Mary central to his work because she was the patron saint of the Crossbowmen's Guild. This painting was made to be the altarpiece of their chapel, the Chapel of Our Lady outside the walls in Leuven. It was on the altar of the chapel that the function of the painting became clear. At the climax of the Mass, the priest raises the consecrated wafer, the host. In the Catholic faith, this is the moment when the host is transformed into the body of Christ.
You perform a Mass in front of this painting. At the high point of the Mass, the greatest mystery, the priest raises up the wafer. That round wafer, as he holds up, is aligned exactly with the body of Christ. That's what transubstantiation is, the flesh of Christ. So not only do you see aligned the wafer and the body of Christ, but in a sculptural framework, you see the figure, the body, the event, the historical event of the descent from the cross come to life.
The descent from the cross made Van der Weyden's name. His painting was recognized as a masterpiece. Within a few years, this copy was painted, also in Leuven. A local artist turned Van der Weyden's monumental composition into a family snapshot, putting one of Leuven's top citizens into the role of donor. At the age of 64, Rogier van der Weyden died after a long and successful career, but the influence of his masterpiece continued to grow. Over the following decades, artist after artist fell under the influence of the descent.
It seems that the inventions that Van der Weyden made were so striking that other artists throughout Europe almost could not get away from them. They are quoted again and again and again.
Engravings flipped the design and reproduced it in thousands of prints. Even sculptors borrowed figures from it. As later artists reworked the painting, they lost sight of Van der Weyden's big idea. Instead of an empty box, his figures got lost in increasingly elaborate landscapes. But even an inferior copy increased the fame of Van der Weyden's original, and the descent was rapidly becoming the painting that everybody wanted. In 1548, an art collector appeared who wanted more than a copy. She wanted the original itself. She was Mary of Hungary, and she was nothing less than the governor of the Netherlands. Mary governed as a regent on behalf of her brother, the Emperor Charles V. Her rule marked the beginning of Spanish domination of the Netherlands.
She was a very powerful woman, actually, and as women regents go, one of the most able of her time, and she's recognized like that by all her contemporaries.
Mary was on the lookout for art to furnish the extravagant castle she was building at Binche in the south of Belgium. Then she saw the descent from the cross.
I think basically she liked it and she wanted it. And she pressured the guild who owned it here in Leuven into selling it to her.
Mary walked away with the original, and she fobbed off the crossbowmen with a copy of the painting, plus a new organ for their chapel.
If you look at the quality of the painting, it was a bargain. It was the bargain of a century.
No sooner was the painting installed in her castle than an important visitor arrived, her nephew Philip, who was about to succeed his father onto the throne. The world would know him as Philip II of Spain. When Philip stayed with his aunt in 1549, it was like entering a fairy tale castle. At a lavish banquet, tables descended from the ceilings, loaded with exotic delicacies. Fantastic spectacles were staged involving masked balls and damsels in distress. To cap it all, Philip set his eyes on the best painting in the world. The Descent from the Cross was on the altar of the chapel of his aunt's castle. One of the courtiers accompanying the prince, Vicente Alvarez, left us this account.
There was a painting in the chapel showing the Descent from the Cross. It was the best painting in the entire castle, and even, I believe, in the whole world. For I have seen many fine paintings in these parts, but not one that could equal this for naturalness or devotion.
I think Alvarez got it entirely right. I think there is a very, very strong case to be made that this is the most important painting of the whole period, of the entire 15th century.
Philip fell for the Descent in a big way. He may have put pressure upon his aunt, for soon she gave it to him. Philip wasted no time in arranging to take it to Spain. That meant a perilous sea journey. The Spanish royal family shipped huge quantities of paintings from the Netherlands back to Spain. A big freight business sprang up to export works of art. To undertake the dangerous journey across the Bay of Biscay, paintings were wrapped in waxed canvas to make them waterproof. Then they were nailed into specially constructed crates. But for the Descent from the Cross, the voyage was not plain sailing. A near-contemporary report has it that the Descent was almost lost at sea. The Dutch chronicler Karel van Mander described how the painting escaped a watery fate.
This major work by Master Rogier was sent to the King of Spain, and while en route it sank with the ship. It was fished out, and because it was very tightly and well packed, it was not damaged too much, only the glue loosened a little.
To this day, controversy surrounds the question of whether the Descent really survived a dip in the ocean. But perhaps the story should be understood as a kind of allegory.
When we look at Van Mander's story, what we see is actually a retelling of something you find in a whole host of narratives from the late Middle Ages about miraculous images that are shipwrecked and float to shore. And I think this is something Van Mander's picked up on, and it's a way that he has of telling us how absolutely important this painting is.
Patrocínio.
The Descent from the Cross was destined to be displayed in the royal palace of El Escorial, 30 miles from Philip's new capital, Madrid. This startling building is Philip's grand statement as architect, as monarch, and as defender of the Catholic faith. The Descent was now in the hands of one of the most powerful men in the world. From El Escorial, he tried to regulate every detail of his administration. In his austere bedroom and study, Philip worked tirelessly, running an empire that stretched from Mexico to the Philippines. Philip waged his wars to stamp out heresy. He dispatched the Spanish Armada to conquer England for the Catholic faith and fought endless campaigns in the Netherlands to crush rebellion. Today, Philip might be labelled a control freak. He even took the trouble to spell out exactly what his cork painter could and couldn't touch on the Descent when it had to be repaired after its journey from the Netherlands.
4th of July, 1566, from Philip II to Pedro de Hoyo. As for the Descent from the Cross from Leuven, he should repair any colour damage to the clothes and the background, But he should not touch any of the faces, nor should he touch the figure of Mary, nor anything else, apart from the robes and the background.
Philip II of Spain was a deeply pious man who was really fighting for Catholicism, fighting to restore what he thought was the true faith. So he would have found in this a deeply consoling and correct vision of Christianity as he saw it.
Centuries now pass. For 400 years, the descent was kept safe in El Escorial, viewed only by the court and the occasional passing bishop. In 1936, civil war broke out in Spain. General Franco's fascist forces declared war on the Spanish Republic, which was supported by communists and socialists around the world. As workers and peasants attacked the church and its vast properties, many religious works of art were destroyed. In the face of the violent anti-clericalism of its supporters, the Spanish Republic took action to protect artistic masterpieces. The descent from the cross was evacuated from El Escorial to Madrid. As Franco's troops closed in, the painting undertook another dangerous journey. It was loaded onto a train and traveled to Switzerland. Along the way, the painting was harried by bombers and bombardments. In the summer of 1939, thousands of visitors flocked to see the exhibition of Spanish masterpieces in Geneva. With the end of the Civil War, the new Spanish government wanted the descent back. The painting returned to Madrid, where Franco was now firmly in control. Back in the Prado, it had survived the violence of war, but worse was still to come. By the 1990s, the descent was in bad shape. A misguided attempt to strengthen the panel had seen a series of crosspieces screwed into the back to make the painting more stable. Unfortunately, it had the opposite effect. The painting began to tear itself apart. The Prado invited an expert from the Metropolitan Museum in New York to bring his tools and his know-how.
The wood expands and contracts, and this movement that is constantly taking place, you have to allow for that movement. And if you don't, it will eventually cause stresses to build up and cause cracks in the panel and so on. And that's what was happening for something that had lasted from the 1430s onward in such wonderful condition. So it was imperative to do something now.
George Bizaca worked alongside the Prado's conservation team to rescue the painting. They had to take the panel apart to save it.
Towards the right side of the picture, it was clear that there was one individual board that was completely split through along the original joint. It was completely split through top to bottom. On both sides, and it was clear that if I cut the cross pieces or removed some of the screws, I would be able to take apart the panel at least into 3 pieces.
The Prado team cleaned off 500 years' accumulation of varnish and restored the lost paint. They also had to put the panel back together, realigning it perfectly, but without repeating the mistakes of the past. An ingenious gadget enabled the 11 planks to be firmly secured, yet remain flexible.
We had to invent an attachment mechanism that would still allow all of the expansion and contraction that the panel needed to make. So we came up with a mechanism. You can see that as the panel expands and contracts, it can move laterally with very little friction because there's the Teflon piece inside. And then additionally, if the panel needs to flex at all, that the spring mechanism goes into action this way. So it has quite a mobility of movement while still offering a strong support.
The way we see the descent from the cross has changed since it was created nearly 600 years ago. When video artist Walter Verdin set out to make his modern version of the painting, he was astonished by the depth he saw.
For me, it was like, I don't know, like a miracle appearing for me. How these figures in the painting came out of the painting. Like I always compare it with the Viewmaster effect. That the Viewmaster, you know, with this 3D, with the two, when you see with the two eyes different image, and you see really 3D effect.
For a new museum in Leuven, Verdin created the Sliding Time. It's a video installation with screens at 5 different levels. Verdin wanted to explore the impossibly crowded space Van der Weyden had depicted.
Looking at the painting itself in real life in Prado was the first time that I felt these layers and the depth of the painting. I never had it when I looked at it, at the painting in a book or on the internet.
Verdin's slowly shifting screens move us in and out of the image. We can examine how 10 monumental figures are somehow squeezed inside a shallow box. In 1435, the descent from the cross was seen by a congregation of perhaps 60 people in a chapel in Leuven in the Netherlands. In the 21st century, digital technology has found a way to skyjack the painting and pass it on to a global audience. In Madrid, Clara Rivera works for Google. She had an idea about how Google Earth could bring us closer to the painting in an unprecedented way.
I was visiting the museum with some friends that live abroad, and we were all rushed, trying to see as much as possible in the museum in Madrid, and there were a lot of tourists in the museum, and we had to queue, so we really didn't have the time to enjoy art in the museum as much as we would have liked to.
To make the descent available to millions, the Google team made a major innovation. They went into the Prado to capture its masterpieces and upload them onto the Google Earth website. They brought in the most advanced cameras, and one of the first works to be photographed was Van der Weyden's altarpiece.
While we were capturing the descent from the cross, it was really striking to see the level of detail there. And we were there with our cameras and our top-notch technology, and we just couldn't imagine how Van der Weyden was able to recreate this ultra-high-resolution image that looked so real and so vivid 600 years ago with the techniques they had back then. One of the most moving moments during the session was when we saw the Eye of St. John and the tears, because we had big screens in a table, and we were sitting in front of the painting, and suddenly we could see the tear, like a huge, ultra-realistic tear in our screen, and all the team members were just quiet. It was total silence in the room.
Continue to be haunted by this painting because it still speaks to us about loss and how we deal with it.
Even over the enormous passage of time, we can still recognize today the same expressions that we see in newly bereaved people. There's nothing that looks quaint or out of place or odd about the picture. I think it's that which makes it, in a sense, transcend a historical background to it. And that's perhaps why it's a masterpiece.
In a largely secular age, the way in which van der Weyden portrayed the emotions of this group means that the moment can be seen not only as a divine story, but also a human one.
Even if you don't believe in the story depicted, I think you can't help but be astounded by the sheer technical skill of this painting. But he combines that with this astounding concept which makes the image completely unreal. This is not an actual event. There's no narrative detail. The focus is entirely on the figures. There's no extra detail that detracts from the drama of the moment and the passion that is being portrayed.